He shouldn't have knocked that night. Or maybe he should have, maybe that was the point. It was raining again, that steady, thoughtful kind of rain that never announces itself, just settles and stays. The house was quiet except for that sound, and I remember thinking it felt too big for one person. When the knock came, I almost didn't answer. I knew who it was. He'd texted earlier, "Are you still awake?" I hadn't replied, but even silence is sometimes an invitation. When I opened the door, he was there, jacket damp, hair darker from the rain. Eyes steady like he'd already decided something before showing up. Neither of us spoke at first. The lamplight behind me spilled onto the porch, catching the rain in mid-fall. Each drop looked suspended between decision and regret. I stepped aside. He walked in. Before we begin, if you love these quiet stories that live between courage and hesitation, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps me keep creating these small worlds for you. Alright, let's go back to how it started. We'd met months ago through a mutual project, nothing dramatic. Just work and late deadlines and too much coffee. He was younger. Not the kind of younger that needed explaining, but enough that it sometimes echoed in jokes or the music he played when we stayed after hours. He was curious in the way new people often are, eager to see if the world would bend from asking the right questions. I'd already been through the asking. At first it was harmless. A conversation that stretched too long, a message at midnight I pretended not to notice, but curiosity, once acknowledged, doesn't go away. It learns your name and knocks politely until you find yourself answering. Tonight was that answer. He looked around as he entered, not nervous, just observant. "Smells like cinnamon," he said softly. I half smiled. "Tea?" He nodded, then glanced toward the living room. "Can I sit?" "You already know you can." That made him laugh, quiet, almost shy. We moved to the couch, the one by the window where the lamplight hit the edge of the cushions like an afterthought. He rested his elbows on his knees, still dripping rain onto the rug, pretending not to notice. "You didn't reply," he said finally. "I was thinking." "About what?" "Whether opening the door was a bad idea." He looked at me, really looked, no flinching, no apology. "And now that it's open?" I didn't answer. Sometimes honesty takes more space than a sentence allows. The kettle hummed faintly from the kitchen, the sound of rain filling the pause between us. He leaned back, exhaling. "You know, you always talk like time owes you something." I raised an eyebrow. "And what does it owe me?" "A pause," he said, almost smiling. "A chance to hear yourself before you keep running." The way he said it didn't feel like advice, more like reflection. Like words he needed himself. I poured tea into two mismatched cups. He wrapped his hands around his like he was afraid it would vanish if he didn't hold it tight enough. For a moment we just breathed in steam and rain. "You think too much," he said eventually, "and you don't think enough." He laughed softly. "Maybe that's why we work." "Do we?" I asked. He shrugged. "You tell me. You're the one who keeps doors open." That line landed deeper than it should have. Maybe because he wasn't wrong, something about being older had made me cautious, but also, paradoxically, brave. You learn life hides its best parts behind the things you want to avoid. So you start walking closer to them, slowly, deliberately. He set his cup down. "You always look like you're waiting for something to end." I looked up. "And you look like you're waiting for something to start." We both smiled at that, quietly acknowledging the thin thread stretched between those two truths. When the power flickered from the storm outside, he didn't move. The room breathed shadows for a heartbeat, then light returned and found us both leaning forward slightly, as if momentum had made its own choice. He broke the silence with something simple. "Age doesn't scare me," he said. "Pretending does." It shouldn't have hit as hard as it did. But I felt something shift, slow and certain. Like the air right before thunder, the moment when the world holds its breath, waiting to see if you will, too. The rest of the night unfolded not as decision, but as listening, not to what he said, but to what I stopped denying. The storm outside calmed but never really left. Its rhythm just softened, nudging the window panes like a heartbeat that had finally learned to rest. He sat sideways on the couch now. Legs pulled up slightly, eyes tracing the reflections that danced across the floor. "It's weird," he said quietly. "You feel familiar, but not for the reasons I expect." "Familiar?" "Yeah. Not like someone I remember. More like someone who remembers me." That line caught me off guard. It sounded naive and profound at the same time. I wondered if that's what youth really is, the art of saying things adults spent years unlearning. I smiled faintly. "Maybe you just remind me of a version of myself who hadn't stopped asking questions yet. So maybe we've both met versions of us we didn't recognize tonight." That made sense somehow. The rain, the warmth, the slow cadence of voices lowered by reflection, it all blurred time until our ages stopped being opposites and started being echoes. He reached for the tea again. Now cooled, swirling it absent-mindedly. "You ever think about how strange it is that people see numbers before faces?" I looked up. "All the time. That's why I came." He didn't look at me when he said it. "You talk, but you never really let anyone stay long enough to reply." The words landed heavier than they should have. Maybe because they were true. For years, I'd filled silence with analysis, explanations, advice, the comfortable noise of knowing better. He was right, I rarely waited to listen. I didn't think you'd actually knock, I said after a long pause. I didn't think you'd open the door. We both laughed softly, not the casual kind, but the tired, honest kind that feels a little like forgiveness. The room shifted again. That delicate balance between closeness and calm. He glanced toward the bookshelf, tracing the titles with his eyes. You've read all of these? Most. Some I keep just to pretend I still might. That's comforting, he said with a grin. Even unread stories feel less lonely when someone believes in them. He put his cup back down and leaned forward, elbows on knees. You know what's weird? You think being older makes you the teacher, but sometimes being newer gives you clearer eyes. I nodded slowly. And sometimes having seen too much makes you gentler with what comes next. Some conversations don't need conclusions. They just ask to exist long enough to change you. This was one of them. He stood finally, walking to the window. The reflection caught both of us, me behind him, our images overlapping, his outline newer, mine steadier. The glass made us equals for just a second. I should go, he said, without turning. Maybe. He took a breath. But maybe I'll stay until the thunder's completely gone. There wasn't much thunder left, only small murmurs miles away, but I didn't argue. He settled back down, stretching his legs, the quiet filling the space like a soft blanket that had been waiting to be unfolded. When he spoke again, his voice carried the calm weight of a closed book. I think you scare people because you don't need them to finish your sentences. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they're just afraid of pauses. He smiled. And yet, here we are, surviving them together. Time stretched again. Not as distance but as permission to let someone be near without naming the moment. When he finally reached for his jacket. The clock showed nearly 3 a.m. I followed him to the door. The air outside smelled clean, the kind that follows after storms when the world resets itself. He looked back once, half-smile caught in the porch light. You know, he said, you don't look older tonight. Maybe because tonight I stopped trying to be. He nodded slowly. Good. You shouldn't have to. I stayed there after he left, watching until the street swallowed him in quiet light. The door shut softly, but the warmth he carried into the room didn't fade. Everything looked the same, mug on the table. Books stacked, a candle burning low, yet somehow, perspective had tilted just enough to make old things look new again. I walked back to the window and caught my reflection. The echo of his words lingered. You don't look older tonight. He hadn't meant appearance. He'd meant possibility, the kind that hides underneath years until someone reaches in and names it. I smiled at that realization. The age between us had never really been the distance. It was fear, and fear, once named, loses most of its shape. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft light from the window. Outside, dawn was beginning, a shy, pale glow spreading across buildings still wet from rain. Another day starting the way all good stories end, quietly, without applause, but changed all the same.